Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Friday, July the 22nd, 2022. Someone mentioned to me on Twitter after last night's live stream that the live chat replay wasn't working. Well, I ticked the box there on YouTube, and I've done it again. And if anyone notices that the live chat relay isn't working, let me know because that would mean that YouTube has decided to not allow me to allow you or anyone else to read the chat comments after the show is over. First up, in the Year Without Summer, Victoria edition, it's currently 61 degrees in Victoria. That was the high for today. That is 12 degrees Fahrenheit below the historic norm. And it has been like this for, well, months in Victoria. Apparently, England has declared a climate emergency because it got hot in July. That lasted for a few days. It has stopped being hot, particularly hot in Britain. But wasn't I told that weather does not equal climate? Apparently, when it is warmer than normal, it's the world's coming to end. When it's significantly colder than normal, and we had all-time historic lows in Victoria and around the island earlier this year, that doesn't matter. But I went to the Weather Network where I discovered that, oh my God, there's going to be a heat dome over British Columbia coming next week. So it's actually going to be, hot. And that is a crisis because apparently it has never gotten hot in Canada in the summer before. President Gruesome? Well, stranger things have happened. No, actually, nothing stranger than that has happened in American history. Let's go to Jim Kunstler. His column today, People Get Ready. Pretty soon it's going to be every country for itself in this main event of the fourth turning, aka the long emergency. Worse is better, Lenin used to explain to his old Bolshevik cohorts in their vicious pursuit of power. And is there any question now that this is the same operational formula of the shadowy crew behind Joe Biden in its mission to turn the American Republic into a branch office of the Schwalben-Klausian transhuman techno-tyranny? Joe B is doing his part to personally make things worse by taking Paxlovid, the Pfizer wonder drug that wondrously amps up COVID-19 symptoms and extends the course of the illness, as recently admitted by that other eminent double-boosted COVID-19 sufferer, Dr. Anthony Fauci, the sage of U.S. public health. If White House doctors follow the CDC's treatment protocol, they'll soon put JB on remdesivir. Naturally, it kills him. State funeral, boo-hoo. 46 is entombed under the Wilmington Amtrak station. My political fantasy du jour. Thus, Kamala accedes to greatness. She must then appoint a new vice president. That would be, wait for it, California Governor Gavin Newsom. Who else? He was recently captured on video skulking into a back door of the West Wing while Joe Biden was out of town schmoozing up the honchos of Saudi Arabia. Governor Newsom is easily confirmed in the House and narrowly in the Senate when Mitt Romney and Lisa Murkowski vote with the party of chaos. Kamala soon resigns, citing anxiety problems. Now president, Newsom proceeds to accelerate the wrecking of the old USA along the lines of his recent work in California. All DC gas stations are ordered shut to promote the transition to renewables. The DC Mall is declared the national homeless camp. Kunstler continues, I called it a fantasy, but this may be the only move left as the nation utterly loses its patience with the Joe Biden fiasco and the escalating disorders of Western Civ take us into August. The midterm election must be revamped at all costs, they'll say, to save our democracy. A new pandemic is declared in early October, complete with lockdowns, while Google partners with Facebook to roll out a new vote by phone app. By some miracle, then, the Democrats had 30 more seats to their House majority and 5 in the Senate. We enter the new frontier of the Green New Deal and Build Back Better. In other words, the USA completely collapses. A dark scenario, I confess, but doesn't that seem exactly where things are going? An epic crack up is upon us. Every place in the world is primed for meltdown, and a few lands in the periphery are already sinking. Sri Lanka is broke and out of gas after being set up as a WEF Schwaupenklaus low carbon eco state experiment. Panama is in revolt over extreme government corruption, food scarcity, and the after effects of an especially severe 2 year long COVID lockdown that the rest of the world hardly heard about. Perhaps because China has operational control over the vital Panama Canal and the CCP has operational control over the World Health Organization, which set up Panama as a lockdown lab project. Of course, Europe is suddenly a magnificent mess with governments falling like duck pins, industry shuttered from lack of fuel, and citizens rising up against insane WEF diktats to drastically reduce livestock and shut down farming. In effect, declaring food production an unacceptable environmental hazard. And I will have more about that, the deep greens, later in this program. This, of course, after the governments of Euroland cut their own throats by self-sanctioning themselves out of Russian oil and nat gas. It's especially bizarre in Germany, the largest economy of the region, which had just this year conclusively realized and admitted that its green energy policy was a complete bust, forcing them to shut down major wind turbine installations and resort to producing electricity with coal. The governments of Merkel and then Olaf Scholz reveal themselves as the sheerest hypocritical idiots. And now the ground is even shifting under the CCP as China's extravagant matrix of city building, mortgage debt, and banking fraud rattles its financial system. What a surprise! Potent as it has been in bribing politicians around the world, infiltrating governments and cultural institutions in every land, in getting the news media to do their bidding, the CCP is apparently losing its grip on the Chinese people, who are sick of being locked down, tracked, and swindled. The tanks are out. This is not the same movie as Tiananmen Square 1989. This is the CCP bankruptcy, an epic event that will thunder through the global south, sending Africa into famine and chaos and South America into yet another rotation of elites. Kunstler concludes, pretty soon it's going to be every country for itself in this main event of the fourth turning, aka the long emergency. Global unity is a mirage, along with all the preposterous narratives of a world government. And in every country for itself, it's going to be every community, every family, every person for itself until, emergently and painfully, everyday life can be reorganized from the ground up. People get ready. So what do we know about this Gavin Newsom character? Well, he's certainly handsome and well-groomed. I'll give him that. He was born in 1967, attended Redwood High School, and graduated from Santa Clara University. Yes, he comes from, well, let's put it this way. His father is called William Alfred Newsom III, a state appeals court judge and attorney for Getty Oil. And it is through Getty Oil that Gavin Newsom made his fortune. Yes, family friend Gordon Getty greased the skids for Gavin Newsom to become a wealthy man. Getty told the San Francisco Chronicle, this is from Wiki, that he treated Newsom like a son and invested in his first business venture because of that relationship. According to Getty, later business investments were because of the success of the first. Well, you know, if Gordon Getty treated me like a son, or treated any of you men out there as sons, we do pretty well too. So Newsom's first political experience came when he volunteered for Willie Brown's successful campaign for San Francisco mayor in 1995. Brown appointed Newsom to a vacant seat on the Parking and Traffic Commission. Is that one of those no-show jobs that you earn $60,000, $70,000 a year for showing up once a week or once a fortnight. Kamala Brown got two of such jobs from Willie Brown, but of course she paid him back in other ways. Brown appointed him to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, and then he moves up, becoming mayor of San Francisco and lieutenant governor, and then eventually a governor. Now, I came across this. Newsom has said he did not have an easy childhood, partly due to dyslexia. Now, the number of people who claim to suffer from dyslexia has absolutely exploded. And apparently, he still suffers from severe dyslexia, which challenges his abilities to write, spell, read, and work with numbers. I would suggest that people who suffer from grave disabilities in writing, spelling, reading, and working with numbers are not fit for political office, but that would be cruel and ableist. Throughout his schooling, Newsom had to rely on a combination of audiobooks, digests, and informal verbal instruction. To this day, he prefers to interpret documents and reports through audio, which you can't do. That can't be done. Just one book. Any of you who've listened to books on tape or books on CD or streaming books or whatever will know how long it takes to get through one book that way. It is my firm belief that most people who claim to suffer from dyslexia are actually, in fact, merely not very bright. Like our Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau. I don't know whether he claims to suffer from dyslexia, but he boasted some years ago that he cannot add 13 to 14 to make 27. Notwithstanding that, he was a math instructor at a Tony Vancouver private school. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Denny McDougall, Anrun, Dan, Don from Beyond. Dan Allison says Newsom has everything it takes to be a supervillain. You know, there was a meme going around a few months ago. I don't know whether you saw it. It goes like this. So Gavin Newsom is in a bar, and he sitting at a table with his wife, his second wife, and he sidles up to the bar where there's an attractive young woman, and he leans into her and says, "My wife and I are really digging your vibe. Would you care to join our table?" Oh, yeah, something else about Gavin Newsom. He claims to be a practicing Catholic, which is rather mysterious because he divorced his first wife, who is still alive. That would be Kimberly Guilfoyle, who is now with Donald Trump Jr. They are engaged and have been engaged for 2 years. Gavin Newsom later remarried. He got married a second time to a woman called Jennifer Siebel, who apparently is a documentary filmmaker. You know, that Getty money really helps. This was not a church service. It was a civil service. So according to the Catholic Church, Gavin Newsom is living in sin. So how he could be a practicing Catholic? Well, I've heard no talk of an annulment in his case. Annulments are very, very easy to get in the United States. It's a scandal. Last time I checked, 90% of the world's Catholic annulments occur in the United States. Don from Beyond says, "Oh, good, the COVID-19 tag is not there today." Hello to Mercurius Aulicus, who says, "Greetings, chaps from Australia," to William Hicks. Summer without relief here in the Midwest, says Ann Run. Hello to J Boss, Oscar Toe, who says, "The runways are melting." Mercurius Aulicus says, "It's chilly here in Queensland." Justin Proto, hello, says, "Heat domes and polar vortexes. What will we do?" Hello to our valiant moderator, Chocokin666. And yes, Anron says movie pitch. It's like Weekend at Bernie's, but he is the president. Stole that one. Yeah, that was from Alex Berenson. Art Bell, hello. Truth is like the sun. You can shut it out for a time, but it ain't going away. That's attributed to Elvis. And who else do we have here? I want to watch Mallrats, says Oscar Toe. That's Kevin Smith's second movie. I saw that on cable a year or so after it came out, and I thought, this movie is so preposterously bad, they will surely never let Kevin Smith make another movie. You know that gag where satellites are reconfigured from the ground so that the whole world or whoever has to watch something? That gag was so tired that it was mocked in Wayne's World. That's how tired that gag was. But Kevin Smith decided to do the gag again for real. Hello to David the Gnome. Oh, who else do we have here? Newsom is probably already acting president for all we know, says Oscar Toe. My Trail of Disgrace says there is usually a bit of a delay in availability of chat replay with archived streams on YouTube, but usually should be available after a day or so. Dan says Newsom is a weasel personified. Who else here? I'd like to watch a terrible movie now and then, says Oscar Toe. Art Bell says per year of crickets to be ground into bits and added to food or made into food, cheap to raise them. Hip him out to KMG for his barbecue sauce to come. Move over Paul Newman. Canada has KMG. And hello to Agurian. Yes, Newsom's first wife was Kimberly Guilfoyle, Jim Smith points out. Hello to Van Man. Hello, Kevin. Hope all is well. Well, as I like to say, as well as can be expected. I hate how they're calling bugs micro livestock, says Oscar Toe. Huge cricket factory here in Ontario, 6.6 million kilograms of protein. That's the first part from Art Bell. Dyslexia equals stupidity. You're curious. I like a funny story. Well, maybe not funny, about Nelson Rockefeller, who was governor of New York many, many times and was vice president of the United States, and died on the job, as we like to say, with a young woman whose name escapes me. It was an illiterate name. His father or his grandfather was so upset with Nelson Rockefeller naturally being left-handed, so he tied a string around his wrist. And whenever Nelson would move first with his left hand, he'd give a hard jerk on the string, with the result that Nelson Rockefeller seemed to have induced dyslexia to the extent that he found it impossible to remember people's names and referred to everyone as fella, which was seen as an example of his common touch. Now I'm obsessed with the idea of finding out what was the name of the unfortunate young woman who died, who was present, very closely present when Nelson Rockefeller died. Megan Marshak, that was her name. Yeah. Yeah, pretty funny story. Let's get back to it here. White House issued photo of Joe Biden after COVID diagnosis raises some questions. This is from Sister Tolja at Red State. And so, yes, Karine Jean-Pierre noted that the president will isolate at the White House and will continue to carry out all of his duties fully during that time. As I said yesterday, are they not going to let this man have some rest? Indeed, Biden appears to be carrying out some duties in the photo below. This photo taken yesterday, but it's what Biden isn't doing that has raised questions. And there's a picture of him at a desk with some papers and he's holding a pen, and I believe there's a smartphone underneath his hand, and there's a notebook. As it turns out, the notebook is blank, empty. Perhaps he was just starting work. From the Daily Wire, White House COVID coordinator, one of those Patels, quote, "The president is doing better. He slept well last night. He ate his breakfast and lunch fully. He actually showed me his plate. I did see an empty plate with crumbs," unquote. Someone on Twitter said, "This is how I talk about my 4-year-old." And in a breathless article from NBC News that took 4 people to write, Biden's COVID diagnosis throws a wrench in the White House's midterm push. And again, I have to ask the question, do these people actually believe what they write? The famous British journalist Claude Coburn famously said, "Don't believe everything you write." President Joe Biden's COVID diagnosis risks upending, at least in the near term, the White House's midterm strategy, costing him valuable time on the road and potentially raising questions about his age and fitness, because no one has been raising questions about his age and fitness before. For a White House staff struggling to bolster his record low approval numbers and help Democrats hold on to seats in Congress, there was a sense that the timing couldn't be worse. One person close to the White House said, with Biden fresh off a string of overseas trips, officials had been gearing up to get him on the road back home in the crucial months before the midterms. While Biden continued working from the White House residence Thursday, he was forced to cancel a trip to Pennsylvania, where a key Senate seat is up for grabs, and it's unclear when he will be able to resume travel. He will isolate for at least 5 days and only leave isolation once he tests negative, the White House said. Yeah, that Paxlovid, that might not have been such a good idea if he wants to test negative. There's a political concern here, said one Democratic strategist who asked not to be named, discussing internal White House matters. Obviously, there's the elephant in the room about how well he recovers. Does he have a pretty mild case, or does he have complications? Seeing as Biden's popularity is at Nixon 1974 levels, this is one of those cases where Democrats in what are considered to be close races discreetly say, the president doesn't need to come here. Oh, nobody wants to. We don't want him here. Biden is associated with failure, even disaster. And Democratic candidates, of course, do not want to be associated with that. Jonathan Swan at Axios reports a radical plan for Trump's second term. Former President Trump's top allies are preparing to radically reshape the federal government if he is reelected, purging potentially thousands of civil servants and filling career posts with loyalists to him and his America First ideology. The impact could go well beyond typical conservative targets such as the EPA and the IRS. Trump allies are working on plans that would potentially strip layers at the Justice Department, including the FBI, and reaching into national security, intelligence, the State Department, and the Pentagon, sources close to the former president say. During his presidency, Trump often complained about what he called the deep state. The heart of the plan is derived from an executive order known as Schedule F, developed and refined in secret over most of the second half of Trump's term and launched 13 days before the 2020 election. Well, this is excellent news. Excellent news. But there's one other thing that Trump needs to do if he becomes president. Oh, besides on day one, I suggested this back in 2016. On day one, announce that all disparate impact lawsuits from the Department of Justice are quashed, and there will be no more disparate impact lawsuits from the Department of Justice. Oh, and furthermore, NGOs are being zeroed out, every single one of them. This is from the Associated Press. Steve Bannon, a longtime ally of former President Donald Trump, was convicted Friday of contempt charges for defying a congressional subpoena from the House committee investigating the January 6th insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. Oh, leave off. It's a funny kind of insurrection where they don't bring guns, isn't it? He faces up to 2 years in a federal lockup when he's sentenced. Each count carries a minimum sentence of 30 days in jail. Bannon has responded to this, and we have a story from Morgan Phillips at the Mail. Former White House advisor Steve Bannon tore into the gutless members of the show trial January 6th committee for not appearing at his trial after a jury found him guilty after less than 3 hours of deliberation. Bannon thanked the judge and jury, but said he only had one disappointment after he was found guilty. The gutless members of that show trial J6 committee didn't have the guts to come down here and testify in open court. Bannon added that he may have lost the battle, but he had not lost the war. I stand with Trump and the Constitution, he added. Bannon is the first figure to be found guilty of contempt of Congress since Attorney General Richard Kleindienst and Watergate burglar G. Gordon Liddy were convicted in 1974. You want to hear about politicized justice system? Let's talk about G. Gordon Liddy. Gordon Liddy, who had no criminal record, and of course was a veteran and a former FBI officer, was convicted of a first offense, breaking and entering, in which nothing was stolen. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison by Maximum John Sirica, who became the darling of the left because, obviously, first offense break-in, in which nothing was stolen, fully deserves 20 years in a federal prison. As it turned out, Gordon Liddy served about 4 years in a federal prison. And it was put to him that if he started ratting on other people, they would let him out of prison, but he refused to rat. He later found that Judge Sirica had actually altered testimony in trial documents. Yes, great leftist hero. Yes, and Bannon isn't going down without a fight. Glad to see it. Let's hear some more justice. This is from Jim Hoft at Gateway Pundit. The DOJ is purportedly working on a plea deal with Hunter Biden. This indicates that many crimes related to trafficking drugs and women and extorting and taking bribes and the millions from foreign entities while his dad was Obama's VP will go unindicted. According to the New York Post, reports that federal prosecutors are on the verge of wrapping up the Hunter Biden investigation suggest that a so-called generous plea deal for the first son is in the works. Lawyer Jim Trusty and other legal experts also discounted the notion that officials may be concerned about bringing charges because of the looming midterm elections. Fox News and CNN reported Wednesday that the Delaware grand jury probe of Hunter Biden was at or near a critical stage, with sources telling CNN that officials recently discussed potential tax charges and a potential charge for making a false statement in connection with a handgun purchase. You may have heard this old legal joke that under the grand jury system, a prosecutor could get an indictment of a ham sandwich. If the prosecutor in the DOJ case against Hunter Biden is decided to go for a slap on the wrist, it's because the DOJ is a thoroughly politicized institution. Hunter Biden took millions from entities in Ukraine and China while his father was Obama's VP. This apparently is going unnoticed. There is evidence Hunter made millions in Ukraine, the hotbed for DC corruption. Rudy Giuliani was all over the Biden family grift. This is why they are after Rudy and so desperately trying to understand what he knows about the corrupt Biden family. Oh, this is a sad story from page 6 at the New York Post by Emily Smith. Hunter Biden's marriage to Melissa Cohen is on the rocks. I just thought that these crazy kids could make it work, but sadly, apparently not. Sources close to President Biden's wayward son, well, that's one way to put it. Incestuous crackhead grifter is what I would prefer, say both Hunter and his South African wife are frustrated because they are in lockdown while she has confided in friends that life with Hunter is hard. Yeah, okay, I'm not going to go there. One source close to the couple said they never go anywhere because they've been instructed to stay out of sight and away from the cameras while the investigation into Hunter continues. Added to the pressure, the Secret Service lives in a much larger mansion next door, and they watch over Hunter like hawks. It is extremely frustrating for both of them. I believe that the Secret Service has rented a house that costs $36,000 a month, all to babysit Hunter and his wife. Oh, and their baby Bo. Yes, another reminder of the son who died of brain cancer, and of course, Father Joe never misses an opportunity to bring this up. Sorry, only $30,000 a month for the Secret Service house. Uh, the agents are nicely holed up in the neighboring luxury Spanish-style sea view villa with 6 bedrooms, a pool, tasting room, gym, spa, and even a tower. The couple married in a surprise ceremony in 2019, just days after meeting one another, and welcomed their son in March 2020. I've got a pretty good idea what happened there. That Joe got on the phone to Hunter and said, "Get married." Why? You know why. But there's no one really, I don't really have anyone to marry. We'll find someone. What do you mean you'll find someone? How much money do we have in the slush fund? And then a figure is named. Yeah, we'll find someone. We'll find someone. Yes. Melissa Cohen, who is reportedly a filmmaker as well, is quite an attractive blonde. And why she would want to hook up with a, well, let's just say Hunter Biden. One would think that a woman like Melissa Cohen would have quite a bit of choice. Quite a bit of choice. Of course, she was 32 when she got married, which suggests that perhaps marriage was not high on her list of priorities. Oh, yes, in more justice news, Democrat attacks Lee Zeldin on stage with knife. And Lee Zeldin is candidate for governor, Republican candidate for governor of New York State. And he was speaking on stage, and a man came up with, it's on video, with a knuckle duster with points for stabbing. And Zeldin and others pulled him off. As Zeldin predicted, the suspect, identified as David Jacobonis, 43, of Fairport, New York, was charged with attempted assault in the second degree. He was arraigned in Parenton Town Court and released on his own recognizance. Yeah. More political justice. And in more political justice stories, this is from the New American. The New York City bodega owner who killed a rampaging thug in self-defense won't face a murder trial after all. New York City District Attorney Alvin Bragg dropped a second-degree murder charge against Jose Alba, who struggled with the assailant and his crazy girlfriend. The murder charge was such an outrage that even leftist Mayor Eric Adams condemned the prosecutor for jailing the innocent man. But Alba should never have been charged. It's likely the prosecutor, one of many Soros prosecutors elected nationwide, who are not enforcing the law against black suspects, wanted to find out how far he could push the leftist legal agenda called anarcho-tyranny. The term anarcho-tyranny was coined by the late, great Samuel Francis. And, I read recently someone being linked to Sam Francis. Sam Francis was a white supremacist who was fired from the Washington Times. Sam Francis was fired from the Washington Times because of a campaign against him by that creep Dinesh D'Souza. This was in the late 90s, 96, something like that. D'Souza was in trouble for something that he had said, and his response was, "Yeah, what about Sam Francis? He's much worse than me." What Sam Francis had written a column with regard to the Southern Baptists groveling about their lack of opposition to slavery in the distant past. And Sam Francis pointed out quite correctly that there is not a word against slavery in either the Old or New Testaments. Here's an essay from Adam Ellwanger at The American Mind, and it is really quite to the point. It's an attack on process. There's a type of person interested in politics who restricts his concerns to policy. He may claim to be above the distractions of the culture war, which is just blood sport for partisans. Our real focus, he will insist, should be figuring out legislative strategies to remedy the problems we face. Any discussion beyond tinkering with policy threatens to undermine the collaborative decision-making that is necessary to implement effective policy. Many who fit this type are intelligent but miss the whole picture. These policy wonks are relics of the 20th century when normal democracy still obtained. Normal democracy exists when certain preconditions for the proper function of democratic governance are met. There needs to be an agreement between the government and the governed about what problems the nation faces and which classes of problems must be prioritized. Next, the majority of people who hold elected office must agree upon the stated rules and unstated conventions that set the procedural limits for political action. Further, upon the implementation of a new policy, there must be a common interest in making it work and a public belief that the new policy will endure. Finally, when these preconditions are not met, citizens must have the means to ensure that they are reestablished. If the criteria for normal democracy isn't met, there is no constructive use or role for the policy wonk. In times of democratic dysfunction, every policy concern, except those that immediately threaten the existence of the nation, must be subordinated to the urgent task of reestablishing normal democracy. Roughly since the turn of the century, America has not enjoyed the prerequisites for normal democracy. But our political class continues to chatter about this or that policy, which has allowed the dysfunction to metastasize. The longer that a state of democratic dysfunction endures, the harder it becomes to restore normal democracy. For these reasons, the policy wonk of 2022 is an unwitting agent working to compound the dysfunction. Arguing about how long of a waiting period we should enact for the purchase of firearms, how much to raise taxes, how to structure a path to citizenship for illegal immigrants, how to lower the cost of health care, all falsely comforting distractions, rewarding and reinforcing the self-important pretense of the policy wonks. Consider our foreign affairs. The war in Ukraine is a pressing problem from the perspective of the Biden administration. Still, no one has made a clear case to the public about exactly how this conflict, or the jumble of ways in which we are urged to intervene, are critical to American interests. The still more ominous prospect of war in Taiwan differs little in this regard. Our elites show a deep hesitance to abandon Vladimir Putin as their all-purpose scapegoat in favor of Xi Jinping. Matters are worse on our own shores. For roughly half of the nation, decades of de facto open borders have created urgent economic, cultural, educational, and political problems for America. Nevertheless, there is almost no indication that leaders register the public exasperation about it. Officials on the political right complain about the millions of people entering the country illegally, but do very little to stop it. Meanwhile, much of the left sees the wave of illegal immigration as an unequivocal positive for the nation, even if they deny it is happening. With inflation and prices rising and everyday Americans feeling the pain, leaders in Congress and voices in the media congratulate Biden for presiding over one of the best economic periods in American history. The situation shows that no shared understanding of the rules of politics exists anymore. When Democrats demanded action from Barack Obama to address the situation of the so-called dreamers brought to the United States illegally as children, he rightly and repeatedly insisted that he couldn't act without the approval of Congress on this matter. Then, using the pen and phone that he was so fond of, he conjured the deferred action for childhood arrivals into being all by himself. This usurpation of legislative power was later upheld by the courts. Yes, these process obsessives are worse than useless. And more news from New Zealand. And whenever we get a story from New Zealand, I always hope to see another picture of that sad Muslima, Jacinda Ardern. This is from Emily Craig at the Mail. COVID death rates have reached pandemic highs in New Zealand as the country battles another havoc-inducing Omicron wave. Weekly virus fatalities hit 151 in the 7 days ending July 16th, compared to 115 in the worst week of the previous flare-up in March. It means that the country's current mortality rate is twice as high as the UK's and 4 times higher than the US. In the latest 24 hours, all 26 COVID deaths occurred among over 60s. Omicron subvariant BA.5 is driving the current wave. Another 64,780 cases were confirmed last week, although authorities say the true figure will be much higher. Once held up as evidence that it is possible to suppress the virus, New Zealand's swift response to the pandemic and its geographic isolation allowed it to escape its wrath. Jacinda Ardern's government dropped its zero COVID policy, which saw the nation nicknamed a hermit kingdom last year once the population was largely vaccinated, with 8 in 10 people now double jabbed. Since then, the virus has spread. Experts told Mail Online that previously low levels of infection in New Zealand due to strict COVID curbs is behind the high fatality rate now because the economically crippling measures only delayed inevitable infections that could have built up immunity. Or as Alex Berenson likes to say, virus gonna virus. And Paxlovid. There's a story about this Wunder drug at Slate by Lizzie O'Leary. Not Elizabeth, not Liz, but Lizzie. Is Paxlovid the miracle drug we thought it was? More than 1.8 million have taken it. It's not equally helpful for everyone. She begins. A couple of weeks ago, I tested positive for COVID. I went on the antiviral drug Paxlovid right away. I felt significantly better after being on it for 3 or 4 days. When I took a home test, I was still positive, but only had a very faint line. Then after finishing the 5-day course of the drug, I started feeling sicker again. My fever returned. I started testing strongly positive. What happened to me has happened to lots of other people, including Anthony Fauci, and has been dubbed Paxlovid rebound. The rebounds don't seem to be landing people in the hospital or leading to death, but they're not fun. And more important, they have public health implications because people who thought they weren't contagious anymore actually might be. What we don't really know yet is what's driving these rebounds and how common they truly are. You know, it seems fairly obvious now that what should have been done from the beginning was to protect the very old people by isolating them and just let COVID-19 rip, thus building up natural immunity. And in December of 2021, the FDA granted Pfizer an emergency use authorization for Paxlovid. You know what other drug still has an emergency use authorization and is still not is not being produced and dispensed under normal procedures? Why, that would be the Pfizer jab and the Moderna jab. And there's a reason for that. The reason for that is if they're no longer EUA drugs, then the blanket immunity given to the drug companies no longer obtains, and then they would be liable for billions or trillions of dollars worth of damages. And let's see if there's anything new here at Eugippius. Nope, Joe Biden still has COVID, and he's taking Paxlovid, so it could be a while. We know that Dr. Fauci was knocked out for 4 weeks. That doesn't sound all that mild to me. Does that sound mild to you? Alex Berenson at his Substack Unreported Truths. The mRNA vaccines have failed, provably, indisputably. The risk estimates released by Centers for Disease Control are politicized garbage based on hospital and state data that intentionally underestimate the number of vaccinated Americans who have been hospitalized or died. The raw numbers from other countries are far more trustworthy and consistent. They show that 6 months after injection, the basic 2-dose mRNA vaccine regimen does not protect against Omicron and may even increase its risk. This failure is not confined merely to infection, but to severe outcomes like hospitalization. Boosters increase protection, but the increase is temporary. Worse, a fourth dose appears to provide less additional protection than a third and to fade more quickly. At best, absolute best, the shots appear to have bought a few months in 2021 of a false dawn at a cost that is still rising. The reality of mRNA jab failure is deeply unpleasant for governments and health bureaucrats. They've spent the last 18 months touting and sometimes mandating these shots with the active assistance of legacy and social media outlets. In the last couple of months, as the failure has become increasingly apparent, they have taken steps to cushion the blow, pushing boosters, which temporarily hide the problem, at a long-term cost that remains unclear, clamping down on data about hospitalizations and deaths among vaccinated people they once readily provided. Most of all, hoping that the antiviral drug Paxlovid, immunity from prior infection, and Omicron's relative mildness would keep death counts low even as infections and hospitalizations rocket higher. That third bet looked to be working for most of spring 2022. But once again, the virus is not cooperating. The new Omicron subvariants elude vaccine protection almost immediately and are at least as virulent as earlier Omicron variants. Infections are headed higher. Despite the fact that many tests are taken at home and not reported positives have nearly doubled since mid-June. They are higher than at any point in the epidemic except for the winter Omicron peak. Deaths remain low, in part because many governments have tightened their rules on reporting COVID deaths, but they're almost certain to rise notably. One of the epidemic's core truths is that deaths lag. When reported case counts rise, deaths follow eventually. Just as striking, all-cause mortality, that is, deaths from COVID and other causes, remain extremely high in the highly vaccinated countries. In Europe, which has good and timely data on deaths, reported excess mortality is now far above average for the third year in a row. This trend runs contrary to the expectations 2 years ago of demographers and infectious disease experts. They predicted publicly that deaths would quickly return to normal as COVID rolled out, since the coronavirus generally targeted a small number of people who were nearly at the end of their lives. Instead, the wave has not rolled out and non-COVID excess deaths are running high. Worse, among young Europeans, reported excess mortality is trending higher this year than in 2020 or 2021. In fact, before the widespread rollout of the jabs in mid-2021, Europe had no excess mortality among people under 45. Now it does. Squint hard enough, and you can find explanations other than the mRNA vaccines for this crisis, delayed healthcare, or a return to risky behavior. But none of them make as much sense as the obvious one, and none of them square with what governments and the media promised on that Monday morning in November 2020 when Pfizer and BioNTech reported their first results from their pivotal clinical trial of BNT162b2. The vaccines have failed. They were a noble-ish experiment, but they failed us. Now, we are failing them by insisting they can do what they cannot and increasing the risks they pose to all of us. The push for boosters especially needs to end today. Oh, but Time Magazine tells us why you'll need to get COVID-19 boosters again and again. Wherever COVID goes next, Alex Berenson concludes, and at this point we don't know yet, the mRNA shots will play no role in ending it. They are part of the problem, not the solution. It is time, well past time, to admit the truth. Let's go back to the chat. And what a time to be alive, says David the Gnome. Well, I suppose you could say that about any time. Marcia McLuhan, once again, was asked by a pro-life or anti-abortion, if you insist, group for a slogan. And what he came up with was life. Consider the alternative. Didn't 43's pretzel choke, fall, bruise his face? Asks Hauper. Art Bell, 33 million at max capacity. London, Ontario will soon be home to the world's largest indoor cricket farm. Aspire Food Group, a global industry leader in the production of edible insects. Yeah, Harry Reid got his black eye. Romney and Harry Reid with black eyes. I had a black eye earlier this year. You saw me wearing an eye patch. And I tripped over my shoelaces. Well, it happens. Do you remember for a while there was a string of politicians who accidentally fell and had a black eye in the same eye? It says Oscar Toe. Indeed, I do. Oh, Art Bell says KMG records in 1080 full HD, but no need to go past 720. Talking head content does not require it. BitChute maxes at 720p. For an Irishman, he is lacking in bushy brows. Is that a reference to me? I trim my eyebrows for the reason that they are Irish eyebrows, and I'm not joking. If I didn't trim them, they would be up to about here by now. Yes, another reference to my eyebrows. Well, you know, the hairs have turned white, so since my skin is pretty pale, they tend to disappear naturally. Where's Comirnaty? Yes, Comirnaty is the official, fully approved FDA version of the Pfizer jab, which it doesn't look like is ever going to be released. Hello to Metal Mike, who says, I thought Paxlovid was a Ukrainian town. Don Willis points out LA County under mandated mask policy again. Don't let Liz eat near the axes, says Dan. Newsom, like Trudeau, has merely bland good looks, says British American. Depend on their hair. Take the hair away, they're nothing. Look at Sean Connery, on the other hand, handsome, even bald. Justin Trudeau, yeah, everyone, there was this psychosexual frenzy over Justin Trudeau when he announced for the Liberal leadership, even before that. And this psychosexual frenzy, unlike his father, Pierre, was a both not just female journalist, but male journalist. And Trudeau, because of his, Justin Trudeau, because of his bottomless stupidity, he always looks like a man who's forgotten where he put his keys. Oscar Toe says, if the person who replaces Boris Johnson is a Trudeau Newsom type, we know this is their archetypal leader. Anwar says Jacinda Ardern looks like she could or should play Wendy in a Shining remake. A good one. Hello to Cosmo Juicer, who says, I will lock down the planet unless the world gives me $1 million. Okay. Gavin Newsom is going to be our Trudeau, isn't he? Says Oscar Toe. And let's scroll down to the bottom. Bugs. Yeah, I'm going to be talking about bugs later. Reading the Bible in prayer does wonders for depression, says David the Gnome. Indeed. And Kevin has Norman brows, says Chogakin 666. There's one writer who said all of a person's character can be seen in the eyebrows. That's Oscar Toe. John C. Riley has the perfect Irish bulldog visage, says Hauper. David the Gnome says, I would love to see the black and silver suit KMG with the patch. Okay. Let's talk about monkeypox. AIDS 2.0. This is from NDTV. From Agence France Presse. 95% of monkeypox cases transmitted through sexual activity. According to a study, overall 98% of infected people were gay or bisexual men, in other words, gay. 41% had HIV, and the median age was 38. Woo. According to the latest study in the New England Journal of Medicine, it also noted new clinical signs such as single genital lesions. I've speculated for some years, but all these people who say that the sexual revolution is here forever and current sexual habits will not change, although in recent years we've seen, especially amongst younger people, that they don't seem particularly interested in sex. That a new venereal disease, a new terrible venereal disease, could put paid to that. Before the pill, We had antibiotics. Syphilis was a scourge for hundreds of years. Syphilis was a death sentence, although there's some people who argue that the death sentence was actually due to the treatment, which was mercury, which is a deadly poison. But syphilitics tended to die blind, insane, and in horrible pain. And now we have monkeypox. But it appears that homosexual men learned nothing from AIDS. Nothing. The first author of the study, John Thornhill, said, "It is important to stress that monkeypox is not a sexually transmitted infection in the traditional sense. It can be acquired through any kind of close physical contact. However, our work suggests that most transmissions so far have been related to sexual activity, mainly, but not exclusively, amongst men who have sex with men." Yeah. This research study increases our understanding of the ways it is spread and the groups in which it is spreading, which will aid rapid identification of new cases and allow us to offer prevention strategies. Okay, here's the scenario that, sexual activity of some sort is about to commence, and one man notices that the other man is covered in disgusting lesions. So what does he do? Does he back off? No, no, not today, thanks. No, he just gets into it. Because what's the worst thing that could happen? The median number of sex partners in the prior 3 months was 5, and around a third were known to have visited sex on site venues such as sex parties or saunas within the previous month. Monkeypox broke out of Africa to the Western world after a 10-day long sex orgy, a formal sex orgy, on the island of Gran Canaria. Yeah. Oh, although sexual activity was behind most cases, the researchers stressed in a statement that the virus can be spread via any close contact, such as respiratory droplets. Oh, oh dear, respiratory droplets? You mean it's just like COVID-19? Yeah. Okay. So more on monkeypox. Monkeypox virus could become entrenched as new STD in the U.S. This is from Mike Stoba of the Associated Press. The spread of monkeypox in the U.S. could represent the dawn of a new sexually transmitted disease, although some health officials say the virus that causes pimple-like bumps, oh, that's one way to describe it, might yet be contained before it gets firmly established. Experts don't agree on the likely path of the disease, with some fearing that it is becoming so widespread that it's on the verge of becoming an entrenched STD like gonorrhea, herpes, and HIV. Do you know that amongst gay men, the incidence of gonorrhea and syphilis is off the charts? That syphilis is probably the best indicator that one is going to get AIDS. But no one's really sure, and some say testing and vaccines can still stop the outbreak from taking root. So far, more than 2,500 U.S. cases have been reported as part of an international outbreak that emerged 2 months ago. They also don't know how well vaccines and treatments are working. One impediment: federal health officials do not have the authority to collect and connect data on who has been infected and who has been vaccinated. Okay, but they did with COVID-19. I remember 2 years ago having to give all this information every time I went to a restaurant or to a pub with this ridiculous contact tracing. Oh, so I happened to walk through a room, maybe going to the restroom, and that someone in that area later got COVID-19, and what they're going to establish that I was somehow responsible. How could they possibly know? How could they possibly know? With such huge question marks, predictions about how big the U.S. outbreak will get this summer vary widely, from 13,000 to perhaps more than 10 times that number. Dr. Rochelle Walensky, and that name certainly inspires confidence, director of the CDC, said the government's response is growing stronger every day. Wasn't that a hit in the 70s by Chicago? And vaccine supplies will soon surge. Yay, vaccines! There's nothing that they can't do. And the telltale bumps. There's that use of the word bumps again. I've seen pictures, grotesque lesions, rather like, what was it called? Kaposi's sarcoma, which was, you saw very much in the first stage of AIDS. Dr. Peter Duesberg, it was his firm belief that Kaposi's sarcoma was associated with the use of amyl nitrate, aka poppers, so beloved by Michel Rempel, Calgary MP. Andrea Bambino from, again, Agence France Presse, severe pain, a New Yorker's experience of monkeypox. It was the worst pain that I've experienced in my life, says 26-year-old New Yorker Kyle Plank, recalling his recent monkeypox infection. Although anyone can catch monkeypox, keep saying that. Plank first took notice of the virus in spring when authorities said many of the first cases in Europe and America were in men who have sex with men. I was a little bit worried that it would eventually affect us here in the United States. Planck remembers, especially as he is a member of the alphabet people community. At the end of June, the PhD candidate in pharmacology says he started to feel very sick. Oh, he's a PhD candidate in pharmacology, but this knowledge in no way influences behavior. A fever, swollen lymph nodes, and a negative COVID-19 test made him think it could be monkeypox. They had started on my arms and my hands, and over the course of the day, they spread all over my body. I had about 30 lesions develop at that point, he said, at his apartment in the borough of Queens. Plank was able to get tested July the 5th, and the following day started treatment with a TPOX, an antiviral drug used originally against human smallpox, but authorized in a trial against monkeypox. Plank concedes that his proximity to the medical community made it easier for him to enroll in a study. Monkeypox usually clears up on its own, but can be extremely painful. The pain was so severe for me that I was basically taking warm baths 6 or 7 times a day because that was the only thing in the world that would make me feel better. Plank found the experience exhausting, and adding to his stress was a fear of contaminating his roommate, even though transmission occurs by close contact. That paragraph could be a little clearer. I believe his case was relatively mild. He has written letters, multiple letters to elected officials asking them to increase access to the antiviral drug. But nowhere have I seen suggested in any of these monkeypox stories that male homosexuals should stop having sex with other men until this whole monkeypox thing dies down. And this next story, I don't know how much of it I can read because it is grossly disgusting, almost fantastic. It's from a Twitter account called From Babe the Pig Boy, and boy spelled B-O-I, which has some sexual significance. I think I understand it. I don't really want to know too much about it. Hi, so I have monkeypox, Babe the Pig Boy confesses. Not fishing for any kind of sympathy, but since I'm already known for being pretty unabashed on the internet, I figured I'd give an honest account of how I got and how my symptoms manifested to hopefully educate anyone curious. So then he gets COVID in June. Needless to say, I ended up completely isolating for 3 full weeks, not being able to have sex or make any content. Yeah, OnlyFans content. Needless to say, I was desperate to get back to work. Like, yes, I'm a slut and all that, but sex is both my life and my livelihood. If I'm not making content, I can't pay my bills. So I finally got back into the swing of things and attended a friend's birthday orgy Saturday the night. I've been watching the news on monkeypox, but the general feelings on it really were and still are developing by the day. So I nor anyone else was especially worried, especially since there had only been 2 confirmed cases in the entire county. It was a great time, according to Babe the Pig Boy. I think I came into sexual contact with somewhere in the ballpark of 15 to 20 different men. That's entirely sane. In the following days, once I was back to being sexually active, I made sure to check in with my body to make sure I wasn't experiencing any symptoms. The following Monday, I was feeling totally fine. Filmed with 2 daddies, had a great time. Still definitely no symptoms. I knew I had plans made to go to another orgy Thursday, so I took the days leading up off from sex to minimize any risk of getting or spreading anything. So Thursday comes around, and by this point, I'd gotten pretty nervous about monkeypox. Like I said, it seemed every day the conversation was getting more and more intense. Pretty much everyone and everything said the same thing. There's only a few cases in your county. Risks are incredibly low. Wowzers, did that blow up in my effing face in the end. So this orgy was a piss orgy thrown by some friends, and I'm not going to read any more about that. Okay? Because this guy, he boasts in this tweet storm of consuming a, quote, metric F-ton of human waste. These are the kind of people that we're dealing with here. All right? Remember when Andrew Sullivan told us that homosexual men were, quote, virtually normal? No, they are not. And from Lawrence Dollimore and Mary O'Connor from the Mail, Britain's Girl Guides have sparked a trans row after publishing an interview with the parents of a child who began living as a girl from the age of 5. The largest organization for girls in Britain boasted of its trans-inclusive credentials as it told the story of Rainbow, one of its newest brownies in its summer magazine. In the article available online, parents Jane and Mike, not their real names, explained that when their child was born, they assumed she was a boy before she began identifying more with female characters' toys and books when she was 18 months old. Was Rainbow reading books at the age of 18 months? So let's find out just how made up this story is. The mother in the article said Rainbow had been begging me to buy a dress to wear in public, which she initially refused before finally agreeing because at least with the dress on, she could get back to being a kid. My child has always talked about the differences between boys and girls, but her questions accelerated as she got older. One day, she said to us in a quiet voice, "My real name is Rainbow." That never happened. There's no question in my mind that her demented, diseased parents decided to force this misery onto their child. And let's go to this here. Hang on just a second. As previously noted, when I save Twitter URLs, it's a mystery. Oh, this is from Omni Seren. 3 Men, the National Women's History Museum, is literally, explicitly, in the most basic way, erasing women from history. Biographies. Women have always played an active role in history. Well, thank you for that, museum. Explore some of the historical pioneers and contemporary newsmakers that continue to impact the world. New biographies are added regularly, so check back to discover inspiring new stories. Featured biographies. And the first 3 at the top, Cecilia Chung, who is a trans woman. Andrea Jenkins, who is a trans woman. Rachel Levine, who is a trans woman. You know, this goes to show the utter weakness of feminism. You imagine, not that long ago, 20 years ago, that a bunch of misidentified at birth men who were trans would say, we're women now, and we get to decide what women are, and we get to decide everything about women. We're in charge now. Get out of our way or else, you filthy turfs. Can you imagine that happening? Well, it's happened. And what have the feminists done about it? There's some brave ones who have stood out against it, but most of them have fallen in line because I don't want to be accused of sexual bigotry of any kind. Let's talk about crazy celebrities. This is from Amanda Presta Giacomo at the Daily Wire. Actress Alicia Silverstone said this week she still sleeps with her 11-year-old son, Bear. And again, obligatory Seinfeld reference. When George Costanza wanted to name his child Seven after Mickey Mantle, Jerry said, "Your life is already ruined, but that doesn't mean you have to ruin someone else's." Anyway, Bear, emphasizing that she's a, quote, natural mama and a, quote, loving mama. The clueless actress has made headlines for some of her parenting choices and even joked that their ex-husband and father to her child, musician Christopher Jarecki, initially dismissed the decisions as hippie shit, but he's since come around. Bear and I still sleep together, Silverstone told podcast host Ellen Fisher, and I'll be in trouble for saying that, but I don't care. Fisher noted that Silverstone's non-status quo parenting has been criticized in the press, highlighting co-sleeping with her son Bear. "I believe in love, I believe in nature, and our society is scared of nature and love." Silverstone noted that it's normal in our culture for women to wear string thong bikinis on the beach. Well, it shouldn't be, but never mind. But breastfeeding in public is not normal. And I'm just like, what? I can explain this to you, Alicia Silverstone. Breastfeeding in public is generally not allowed because breastfeeding is a sexual act. Women's breasts are sexual organs. But she's too stupid to understand that. The 45-year-old further questioned why women are sexualized everywhere you look. But we can't gently feed our children with the thing that was made to feed them? Like, what is wrong with you? Oh, yes, it's like sex is a natural act. But we don't allow bonking in public either. Silverstone and Fisher then gushed over motherhood. I wanted to savor every moment of Bear's life. Is this kid in therapy yet? Has this kid perhaps been in therapy for years? During the same podcast, Silverstone reportedly described how she rarely used diapers while potty training Bear, instead watching for clues from her child. Yeah, okay. I wonder how many carpets had to be replaced, how many floors had to be replaced. This Alicia Silverstone woman is, she's bonkers. She seems a very unpleasant woman. It was, I believe, more than 20 years ago that she started carrying on about how Hollywood had turned against her because she was a Jewish woman who was overweight. Oh, this, and she pointed to the special problems that Jewish women have, with being considered to be overweight. Sure, sure, Alicia. Perhaps, someone could write an opera about this, The Agony of Lainey Kazan. Just a suggestion. And in more bonkers celebrity news, it's more of an intellectual celebrity, I suppose. You may have heard, because Rod Dreher never shuts up about it, that he and his wife are getting divorced, but she initiated it. And his marriage had been a loveless sham for a whole decade, but he put up with it for the kids. Well, now he's decamped to Hungary without the kids. And there's something going on with him. I saw this reposted and I thought, okay, it's fake. So I went to Rod Dreher's Twitter feed, and it's not a fake. So he comments on a story from People magazine. Summer penis is real. Doctors agree that heat can make men's penises appear, okay, something or other. Summer is in full swing, and so too apparently is a phenomenon called summer penis. Rod Dreher comments, has anybody checked in with Chet Hanks about the clinical advice for those suffering from white boy summer penis? And there is a picture, the People magazine article is illustrated with a picture of a young, handsome, buff, a shirtless man who is wearing a very thin bathing suit. A lot of people on social media have been saying, "Come on, Rod, you just come out already, okay?" Because this is becoming excruciating. And let's talk about comedy and Jerry Seinfeld. Okay, I made that noise because I saved the link to the YouTube file, and now YouTube, I'm getting a stupid message about how I'm up to date instead of the file. It is a comedian called Tim Dillon, and he's doing his podcast or whatever, and he has some other comedian on, and he begins by talking about how pain, comedy is about pain, and the problem with Jerry Seinfeld is that his comedy isn't about pain, but he has a clip, an audio clip from Jerry Seinfeld accepting a Clio Award, which are given out for advertising, and he riffs about advertising being fake and ripping people off. And no, but you see, this seems to be born out of personal experience, painful personal experience. So that's what makes comedy, pain. And Tim and his guest, Jessica, who's fully on board with this, pain is comedy. No, it isn't. Pain is pain. I'm not a big fan of stand-up comedy because, as someone, I wish I could remember the name, pointed out decades ago, it's too much like psychotherapy for my liking. Oh, you had a miserable childhood, did you? Get in the queue. Oh, you have difficulty getting along with your parents? Get in the queue. Oh, life is hard, is it? Oh, my girlfriend left me? None of that is funny. None of that is funny at all. Not per se. Okay, there's no subject that can't be made funny. And authenticity. Oh, really? Was Bob Hope authentic? His jokes were written by other people. Was Frank Sinatra authentic? He didn't write his own songs. I don't buy this at all. And I really dislike the form of stand-up comedy where let's talk about my family. My family are jerks. Well, your family's still alive. You don't mention their names, but since you're famous, everyone knows who you are talking about here and why you're talking about your family in that way in public, on the Tonight Show, say, in front of millions of people. Jerry Seinfeld has a very famous routine, which he's retired, about being a kid and finding out about Halloween and what people are giving away candy for free. And it's funny. I mean, it's based from real experience, but it's not an unhappy experience. And of course, we've gone from personal misery to sociological misery. Yep, I'm a lesbian. And you know what that's like? Yep, I sure do. Tell me more. Yep. People always saying, why don't you smile more? You could be pretty if you smiled more. And how come your hair is cut so short? Ha! Boy! More! None of that is funny. None of that is funny. But of course, there is a lot of pain, one would think, on the show, Seinfeld, certainly in the character of George, who is, Larry David. I'm not George. George is not based on me. Well, I think to a certain extent, to a large extent, based on Larry. In fact, the actor who played George on Seinfeld said he didn't get the character at all. And he began playing him like Woody Allen. And there was something in the show, some ridiculous thing that George had done. And what's his name? The guy who played George, Jason something or other. He said, that's ridiculous. That couldn't have happened to anyone. And Larry David said, well, it happened to me. And then he said, oh, he cracked the code there. He was just going to play George as Larry David. Money pit. Who's the first person in the world that you think of when you hear the phrase money pit? This is from Jordan Chattel at the Ron Paul Institute. money pit. Zelensky government signals intent to default on tens of billions in foreign debts. Nobody saw that coming. Western governments have allocated well over $100 billion to prop up Ukraine in its war against Russia, with countless billions more flooding into the country at an increasing pace. Yet, as each day passes, it's becoming more and more clear that all of the money awarded and assigned to Ukraine continues to dissolve into a black hole of secrecy, corruption, deceit, and now default. On Wednesday, Ukraine Finance Ministry asked foreign creditors to accept a delay in its debt repayments, requesting a 2-year freeze on billions of dollars in Eurobonds. Per the Financial Times, a rescheduling would amount to Ukrainian default on Kiev's tens of billions in foreign debt. The news comes just one day after the EU ambassador to Kyiv insisted that Ukraine would not default on its foreign debt. The junk-rated sovereign has a balance of about $25 billion of foreign debt, Bloomberg reports. Despite all the money coming in from around the world, Ukraine's budget deficit has spiraled out of control. That's probably because almost all of this money is being stolen. Zelensky's office now claims to have a $9 billion monthly budget deficit, up 80% from just last month. Ukraine's dollar bonds due in 2033 are trading around 18 cents on the dollar, down from about 25 cents at the end of last month and more than 80 cents before Russia's invasion in February, Bloomberg adds. Yeah. Who bought Ukrainian bonds? Really? I'm reminded that back in Stalinist days, that Russians or people in the Soviet Union were bullied into buying government bonds. You pay us so little and we have to pony this money over for bonds, and it was made clear to them that you had better buy the bonds or you will know the reason why. And it looks like there's a chance of a peace breaking out in the Ukraine. We can't have that. Won't somebody think of the military-industrial complex? This is from David Aver at the Mail. Russia and Ukraine have signed a deal to reopen Ukrainian Black Sea ports for grain exports, Turkey and the United Nations said, raising hopes that an international food crisis aggravated by the Russian invasion could be eased. Russia and Ukraine, both among the world's biggest exporters of food, sent their defense and infrastructure ministers, respectively, to Istanbul to take part in the signing ceremony. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres hailed the deal as an agreement for the world, although he admitted it did not come easy. It has been a long road. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan, whose country provided a neutral ground on which to sign the treaty, was quick to lap up praise for his part in organizing the arrangement. He went on to boldly claim war will end at the negotiating table. This is a turning point. Well, one can only hope, but it's obvious that the government of the United States, to give one example, does not want the war to end. Noted geopolitical thinker Justin Trudeau has his own hot take on this agreement. This is from Darren Major at CBC News. Justin Trudeau says he's not convinced that Russia will hold up its end of a deal to reopen Ukrainian Black Sea ports to grain exports. Canada's confidence in Russia's reliability is pretty much nil. They have demonstrated nothing but poor faith, Trudeau told reporters. So there you have it. The great one has spoken. This is from Stephen Chase, ex-colleague of mine, and Robert Fife at the Globe and Mail. Germany's foreign minister said Berlin warned Ottawa that the EU country could be forced to suspend military and economic aid to Ukraine if a Russian gas pipeline turbine stranded in Montreal, a result of Canadian economic sanctions, wasn't returned. Annalena Baerbock said the German government told Canada that the missing turbine led to a stoppage of natural gas from Russia. It could spark popular uprisings and force Berlin to halt support for Ukraine. The Ukrainian government is largely dependent on Western aid, as it fights off a military assault by Russia that began in late February. Speaking to RND, A German media outlet Wednesday, Ms. Baerbock said domestic political repercussions played an important role in negotiations with Canada. The Trudeau government agreed to release the turbine earlier this month and even allow the import, repair, and export of up to 5 more turbines for Nord Stream 1, a pipeline that delivers natural gas to Germany and is majority owned by Gazprom, a Russian state-controlled company. The Canadians said, "We have a lot of questions," and we said we can understand that. But if we don't get the gas turbine, then we won't get any more gas, and they won't be able to provide any support for Ukraine at all because we'll be busy with popular uprisings, the foreign minister told RND. The foreign minister is talking of Germany's foreign minister is warning of popular uprisings in Germany. I would have led with that, okay, instead of the Ukraine. As another former colleague of mine, Colby Kosh, pointed out, these turbines are made by Siemens. And Siemens has an important role to play in the province of Quebec, which has been little reported in this story. And generally, what the province of Quebec wants, the province of Quebec gets. So if the province of Quebec told Ottawa that we will fix these turbines because we are not going to piss off Siemens, well, that's what would happen. And here is another Substack, Psychic Residue, 718 TV. The Ukraine ordeal won't blow over ever. This is from, okay, I'm not even going to repeat the name there. Too whimsical, too grotty. And let me start from the beginning. In August 1948, at the request of Secretary of Defense John Forrestal, the U.S. National Security Council issued a memorandum on U.S. objectives with respect to Russia. A large part of the memorandum was devoted to Ukraine. U.S. analysts argued with certainty that Ukraine was an organic part of Russia, that it was highly unlikely that Ukrainians would be capable of independent national existence, and most important, that an attempt to support Ukrainian separatism would cause a sharply negative reaction from the Russian nation. Quote, "There is no clear dividing line between Russia and Ukraine, and it is difficult to establish one. The economy of Ukraine is inextricably intertwined with the economy of Russia into a single whole. There has never been any economic separation since the territory was reclaimed from the nomadic Tartars and began to be developed by a settled population. Any attempt to tear it away from the Russian economy and form something independent would be as artificial and destructive as an attempt to separate the grain belt, including the Great Lakes, from the economy of the United States. Finally, we cannot remain indifferent to the feelings of the great Russians themselves. They were the strongest national element in the Russian Empire. Now they are in the Soviet Union. They will remain the strongest national element in this space, whatever their status. Ukrainian territory is as much a part of their national heritage as the Midwest is a part of ours, and they are aware of this fact. A decision that would try to separate Ukraine entirely from the rest of Russia involves drawing disapproval and resistance from it, and, as analysis shows, can only be sustained by force," unquote. I will point out that Solzhenitsyn was absolutely right, that the idea of an autonomous Ukraine is a communist foundation. And you know who's responsible for that? Joseph Stalin. Our Substacker comments, "What was obvious to U.S. analysts and statesmen in the era when the United States became a superpower and had a monopoly on nuclear weapons has been forgotten by America's modern political establishment and media. The White House and European Union leaders believe that they can use force or the threat of sanctions to make the Russians think of Ukraine as a country other than Russia. And if the Ukraine succeeds in containing Russia, the reward will be the accumulation of long-term resentment of Russians for whom the West, the United States, NATO, the EU will be seen in one single lens, as a force that prevents Russians from owning and disposing of much of their land and their heritage and being near in one country with their loved ones." Well, I will point out that this crisis began with the so-called Euromaidan when the State Department decided that the government of the Ukraine could not make an agreement with Putin. The EU had offered a agreement with all sorts of strings, Ukraine basically surrendering its sovereignty. And Putin said, I will give you a better deal on energy and you won't have to surrender what sovereignty you have. That was not good enough for Victoria Nuland. And so a coup was instituted, a murder spree began. And the Ukraine is now a illegal, corrupt puppet state. An enormous number of Russian citizens were born on Ukrainian territory, but they did not consider themselves Ukrainians, especially in the sense that the authorities in Kyiv put into this word. Even more Russian citizens have ancestors and relatives in Ukraine. It would be surprising to find a Russian citizen who has none at all. That is, Russians perceive Ukraine as their ancestral land in the most literal sense of the word, ready to point out the graves of relatives and the plot of land on which their house stood. It's interesting to point out that the Ukrainian great literary hero, well, they've got Taras Shevchenko. Oh, what about Gogol? What about Bulgakov? What about all these other people, all these other great writers who were born in Ukraine? None of them considered themselves to be Ukrainians. And of course, people in the West have no knowledge of this. The Ukrainians, the Malo-Russians, came from the territory of modern-day Ukraine and settled widely throughout the vast territory of Russia, making a career both in the church and at the court. The name Ukraine itself was not used at all during this period. The word in both Russian and Polish meant borderlands or frontier. Its use as the name of the territories around Kyiv refers only to the 18th century, when these lands really became a frontier in the permanent wars between Russia and Turkey. The integration of Little Russians, that's Ukrainians, into Russia was not disrupted even by the venture of Hetman Mazepa, who betrayed Peter the Great and defected to his enemy, Swedish King Charles XII, out of self-interest. Mazepa was abandoned by all but his personal guards, and a fierce guerrilla war began against the Swedish armies who entered the territory of modern Ukraine. The first attempt at Ukrainian separatism ended in disaster for the power that tried to rely on it. Franz Liszt wrote a famous and great tone poem called Mazepa, and Mazepa is also a part of his Transcendental Etudes. Oh, yes. You remember when Putin was dying? He had cancer or something else horrible. He's going to be dead any day now. Again, this seems to be almost an iron law. When the West accuses Russia of something, then you know it's true here and not there. Who's dying now? Well, more likely Joe Biden than Vladimir Putin. This is from Moon of Alabama. 50 sick headlines about Vladimir Putin's health. Over the last months, the British MI6 disinformation service had fun with rumors over Vladimir Putin's health, mostly via British tabloids. It used its usual tools, a former MI6 chief, former MI6 spies, and even the ever-available anonymous Russian oligarch who lives in London. Like its other propaganda claims, there were obvious nonsense, but find a reliable echo in the gossip media. I have some trouble reading from this site because it's obviously written by someone whose first language is not English, so there are a lot of errors in the text. Okay. Oh, is Putin dying? Is he mentally ill? It's from the LA Times. So here's all of the sick, dying stories from Reuters, the LA Times, Yahoo, the Daily Mail, the Evening Standard, the Boston Herald, SK Pop, The Mirror, World Crunch, Indie 100, New Lines, The Mirror again, Insider, ABT, Free Press Journal, The Quint, Sky News, Newsweek, Republican World, New York Post, Bulldog, Business Insider, Eurasian Times, News.au, The Chronicle, Insider again, South China Morning Post, The Daily Record, Newsweek again, Newsweek, Medium, CBN News, The Express, CEPA, Financial Review, The U.S. Sun, The London Sun, The Express, The New York Post, The Express, 1945, The Economist, Joe, whatever that is, The New York Post again, The Sun, Hannity, and The New Statesman. How about that? Yes, our wonderful, wonderful free media. And let's check out the latest news from antiwar.com. IEA chief says Europe must cut gas use by 20% to survive winter. survive. Lukashenko says Ukraine war must end to avoid a nuclear abyss. Pelosi, designate Russia a state sponsor of terror. It's another lunatic, senile person in charge. And of course, still, her husband, still making money on inside information, lots and lots of money, which apparently is not illegal. I suppose it's technically illegal, but we don't worry about things like that. I mean, why would we? Let's go back to Tainter and the collapse of complex societies. Declining marginal returns in general can arise from any of the following conditions. 1, benefits constant, costs rising. 2, benefits rising, costs rising faster. 3, benefits falling, costs constant. Or, what leads to collapse, benefits falling, costs rising. In undertaking to study the collapse of any complex society, these conditions should be looked for. The extent to which a global theory is illuminating or trivial depends in part on its ability to clarify matters that were previously obscure, or its flexibility in application, and on its power to incorporate less general explanations. The perspective of declining marginal returns has indeed clarified the collapse process and shown itself highly flexible in application. 3 major, very different cases can be understood by it, and in this chapter it has been shown that a variety of other collapses are, with present information, potentially clarified. As a very general principle, the application of this framework to specific cases cannot be automatic or mechanical. Each society that has collapsed has done so under a set of circumstances that were at least partially unique. The application of a general principle to such diversity requires different considerations in each case, including sensitivity to the peculiar circumstances of local histories. The principle of declining marginal returns has the capacity, logically, to incorporate the explanatory themes discussed in Chapter 3. One exception to this may be the mystical theme, which is difficult to incorporate in any scientific theory. Even so, some of the individual approaches of the mystical theme may prove to be subsumable under declining marginal returns, as will be shown. Resource depletion. The essence of depletion arguments is the gradual or rapid loss of at least part of a necessary resource base, whether due to agricultural mismanagement, environmental fluctuation, or loss of trade networks. Major weaknesses of the approach are why steps are not taken to halt the approaching weakness, and why resource stress leads to collapse in one case and economic intensification in another. Consideration here must be given to the cost of further economic intensification projected against the marginal benefits to be gained. If the marginal utility of further economic development is too low, and or if a society is already economically weakened by low marginal return, then collapse in such instances would be understandable. Collapse is not understandable under resource stress without reference to characteristics of the society, most particularly its position on a marginal return curve. A society already experiencing declining marginal return may not be able to capitalize the new economic development that is often a response to resource stress. Yes, why steps are not taken to halt the approaching weakness? Well, I've asked this with regard to the state of California and the American Southwest in general. This is desert or semi-desert. California does not have its own water. This water comes from Colorado, the Colorado River, and the table of that river has been going like this. The response of California is, come on, illegals, we need more illegals, millions, millions, millions more illegals. Sometimes nothing is done. Steps are not taken to halt approaching weaknesses because elite has gone insane. New resources. The most general statement of this theme is given by Harner, who argues that new resources can alleviate shortages and inequities, ending the need for ranking and complexity. This can be squarely subsumed under declining marginal returns. When a system of ranking and complexity is no longer needed, continued support of it would yield a declining return, and so it is likely to be dropped. Catastrophes. Catastrophe theories suffer from the same flaw as resource depletion arguments. Why, when complex social systems are designed to handle catastrophes and routinely do, would any society succumb? If any society has ever succumbed to a single event catastrophe, it must have been a disaster of truly colossal magnitude. Otherwise, the inability of a society to recover from perturbation must be attributable to economic weakness, resulting quite possibly from declining marginal returns. Insufficient response to circumstances. The failure to adapt model relies on a value judgment that complex societies are preferable to simpler ones, so that their disappearance must indicate an insufficient response. It ignores the possibility that, due to declining marginal returns, collapse may be an economical and highly appropriate adjustment. One major theory under this theme, Service's law of evolutionary potential, has been shown earlier in this chapter to be subsumable under the principle of declining marginal returns. Conrad and Demarest's study shows how the Aztec and Inca empires reached the point of diminishing returns for expansion and declined accordingly. Other theories grouped under this theme are not plausibly linked to collapse. Other complex societies, Blanton's argument that Monte Alban collapsed when it was no longer necessary for some tasks, such as the deterrence of Teotihuacan, nor efficient at others, adjudication of disputes, is fully compatible with the marginal return principle. Monte Alban collapsed, in other words, when the return it could offer became too low relative to support costs. In regard to interpolity competition, John Hicks once suggested that when the ability to expand is lost, the ability to recover from disasters may go too. The ability to expand may be lost due to an economic weakness, or else where the cost of expansion becomes too high relative to advantages. The latter will occur when one complex society impinges on another, e.g., Rome and Persia, and the marginal return for conquest and administration is too low. Intruders. The scenario of tribal peoples toppling great empires presents a major explanatory puzzle. What characteristics of the less complex society and/or what weaknesses in the more complex one could lead to such a circumstance? Service, as noted, ascribed this to his law of evolutionary potential, which, as pointed out, can be subsumed under the principle of declining marginal returns. As discussed in regard to the ideas of Polybius and Service, a more powerful state may not prevail against a weaker one if the latter is ascending a marginal return curve and the former descending. A complex society that is investing heavily in many cumulative organizational features with low marginal return may have little or no reserve for containing stress surges. Such a state may compete inefficiently with a population that is smaller and on paper weaker, but that invests in little but high return military ventures. I will have more from Tainter's Collapse of Complex Societies next week. I was thinking the argument that he makes about collapse, that if there are other polities nearby that can simply absorb the weakened polity, then this cannot be considered an example of collapse. And he talks about the absence of collapse since the collapse of the Roman and Byzantine empires. Such is globalization that the whole world is made uniform. So in terms of less complex societies, where are they? When the whole world is governed, and increasingly so, by liberal democratic principles, you must do this. You must become ever more complex, ever more dependent, not on local produce, but on international produce. That suggests that if the crisis that we are going through now, if there's the worst possible end, there will be no one left to pick up the pieces. Grim thought. And, oh, yes, let's talk about Canada's housing crisis. And we don't hear very much about this because the media is invested in a housing bubble. Housing bubble is a good thing, apparently. Why that should be so? Well, it's certainly a good thing for the people who own this vastly overpriced property. And for everyone else, no. Carl Shimata tweets, and he has a graph, a chief market strategist, he describes himself. You can try to rationalize it all you want, but to me, the Canadian housing market looks utterly unhinged. Data updated for Q1 2022. Real home prices versus real disposable incomes. And we see for Canada that they last met roughly, let's say, the year 2003 or 2004. And from that point, real incomes went like this, and home prices went like this. And the line is pretty much straight up, continues to be straight up. Why is that? Well, there's several reasons. One of the reasons being that Stephen Harper bowed to American pressure to allow American mortgage companies to come to Canada. Don't think you can get a mortgage? Yes, we can give you a mortgage. Also, well, immigration. Immigration. And here's a disgusting article from the National Post, how a Canadian lawyer is helping the growing number of ultra-rich looking to leave China. Yeah, we need even more rich Chinese coming to Canada because it's not enough that there's very few people that can afford houses in British Columbia. But let's take this national, okay? Let's very much take this national. When a Chinese Canadian billionaire faced a closed door trial last month, 4 years after being snatched from Hong Kong, the event did not go unnoticed among China's wealthy entrepreneurs. It was the latest sign that they could be next as Beijing pushes down on the country's most affluent business people, says a Canadian lawyer whose unique practice focuses on building backup plans for ultra high net worth individuals. That nervousness is fueling a growing and urgent interest in leaving mainland China or Hong Kong, says David L'Esperance. The number of very rich business people based in the region contacting him for help in getting out has tripled in the last couple of years, he says, as President Xi Jinping consolidates power, eliminates opponents, and tightens his grip on once freewheeling Hong Kong. And they tend to be wealthier, often worth billions, people who had been entrenched where they were until recently. You know that these people can't get out of China without the permission of the government of China, which means that they're paying bribes or they agree to be Chinese agents once they are in Canada. But wait, definitely Canada should sell its birthright. You know why? Because we get a mess of pottage in exchange. The resulting flight of golden geese could be an economic boon for the countries where they land. Canada is definitely among the mix of possible destinations, but governments here should do more attract the rich fleeing China and their fortunes, said the lawyer. And how did they accumulate these fortunes? How many of them are associated with triad gangsters? But luring such immigrants is not without controversy. Ottawa's investor immigrant program was actually canceled in 2014 because of what the then Conservative government said were an array of problems. Those immigrants had to fork out a relatively tiny investment, paid less taxes here on average than nannies, spent little time in Canada, and often learned neither English nor French, critics said. Those sound like pretty good reasons to me. Actually, there is one guarantee of the collapse of the Canadian housing market when the last corrupt billionaire has left China. That will definitely be the end. But this Blackwell fellow, he just can't get enough of these Chinese, these ultra-rich Chinese. And he takes up the torch for a fellow, a Chinese Canadian billionaire. Oh, that's just too funny. Chinese. Yeah, not Chinese. Sorry, not Canadian, just Chinese. All sorts of people get Canadian citizenship. Why? Because they see Canada as a bolt hole. That's how they see Canada. They have absolutely no loyalty to Canada at all. But if things get, iffy, they can move to Canada. More to the point, they can install their children in Canada to expand their empires. And there is one in particular, supposedly kidnapped by the Chinese government, and boo-hoo-hoo-hoo. His name is Zhao Jinhua, born in 1972, a Chinese-Canadian businessman. He was born in Shandong, China. He attended Peking University at age 14. He was a member of the Communist Party. He was opposed to the Tiananmen Square protests of 1989. Oh, was he now? Was he now? He began his career in business by selling IBM and Dell computers near the Peking University campus in the 1990s. He also worked with Microsoft. Within a few years, he was worth $150 million. Selling computers. You get to be worth $150 million selling computers, do you? Zhao is the owner of Tomorrow Holding, trading as Tomorrow Group, a diversified investment company involved with banking, insurance, real estate development, coal, cement, and rare earth minerals. According to the New York Times, he owns non-controlling stakes in Ping An Insurance, Harbin Bank, Huaxia Bank, and the Industrial Bank through a series of other investment vehicles, in addition to being a major shareholder in Baotao Tomorrow Technology. Zhao reportedly worked on behalf of a number of powerful families in China over the course of his career, and he has been described by the New York Times as a banker for the ruling class. By 2016, he was worth an estimated $6 billion. Zhao's connections with relatives of China's government leaders were demonstrated by his purchase of a 50% stake in CCB International Wanwei Fund Management, an investment management company owned by Qi Kuo, Xi Jinping's sister. Wow, it's a funny kind of dissident, wouldn't you say? But this is exactly the sort of person that Canada needs. One who is like this. No, more like this, with the Chinese Communist Party. In September 2018, all this has been from Wiki, a report from the South China Morning Post citing unnamed sources said that Zhao would soon be brought to trial over the crimes of manipulating stock and futures markets and offering bribes on behalf of institutions. One might say that it's unfair that someone be tried for doing something that everyone else seems to be doing, but that is the price that one pays for flourishing in a corrupt society. Xiao is married to Zhao Hongwen, who is from Inner Mongolia. He purchased a property in Canada and acquired Canadian citizenship. He also has a diplomatic passport from Antigua and Barbuda, which he acquired several days before his abduction. He also owns properties in the United States and a private jet. Perhaps he should seek asylum in Antigua or Barbuda. And, oh yes, remember MMT? MMT was going to be our savior, modern monetary theory. This is from Lance Robert at realinvestmentadvice.com. MMT has been tried and it failed miserably. However, before we get to its failure, we need to review the policy to understand why it failed to work as anticipated. According to Investopedia, the central idea of MMT is that governments with a fiat currency system under their control can and should print or create with a few keystrokes in today's digital age as much money as they need to spend because they cannot go broke or be insolvent unless a political decision to do so is taken. Some say such spending would be fiscally irresponsible as the debt would balloon and inflation would skyrocket. But according to MMT, large government debt isn't the precursor to collapse that we believe it is. Countries like the US can sustain much more significant deficits without cause for concern. And three, a small deficit or surplus can be extremely harmful and cause a recession, since deficit spending is what builds people's savings. This is a medieval idea. It's an idea associated with the alchemists, turning lead into gold. Here is that's my interpretation, not that of Lance Roberts. Here's the critical paragraph. According to MMT, the only limit the government has when it comes to spending is the availability of real resources like workers, construction supplies, etc. When government spending is too great with respect to resources available, inflation can surge if decision makers are not careful. Taxes create an ongoing demand for currency and are a tool to take money out of an economy that is getting overheated, says MMT. This goes against the conventional idea that taxes are primarily meant to provide the government with money to spend to build infrastructure, fund social welfare programs, etc. With this base understanding, we can review the tape to judge whether MMT was successful in its implementation as a policy tool. $5 trillion was spent, and all I got was inflation. At the end of 2019, U.S. federal debt outstanding was $23.2 trillion. Of course, 3 months later, the government would decide to shut down the economy to battle the COVID-19 outbreak. That decision was the defining moment that implemented MMT policy with successive rounds of monetary stimulus, from direct checks to households to expanded government subsidies. By the year-end 2021, federal debt swelled to nearly $30 trillion. Such is the most significant increase in government spending in U.S. history. While the massive flood of stimulus temporarily boosted economic growth by pulling forward future demand, it also created several problems. The most obvious problem was the impact of dramatically increasing demand on a supply-stricken economy. With the economy shut down due to government-mandated restrictions, the flood of stimulus payments led to a demand boost. Given the basic economic of supply versus demand, prices rose. As expected would be the case, the implementation led to a massive surge of inflation. Given most Americans have fixed healthcare and housing payments for a contractual period, the third measure shows what the cost of living is for most every month. And yes, rising to 11.4%. Of course, inflation is not problematic as long as wages keep up. However, therein lies the second problem. The economic shutdown forced millions of workers onto unemployment benefits and subsidies. However, with trillions in stimulus, the economy quickly started to recover. As the economy slowly reopened, virus mandates and policies continued to impact supply chains. With the demand imbalance still intact, the demand for workers skyrocketed, leading to a surge in wage pressures to find workers. The problem, however, is that the surge in inflationary pressures consumed the wage increases seen by workers. Such is always the problem of injecting money into the economic system. The repeated argument that more stimulus helps the poor working class is erroneous. As we argued, in Biden's stimulus will cut poverty for 1 year. When you provide free money, those that provide the products and services lift prices accordingly. In other words, when you provide free capital, a market-based economy will adjust prices to compensate for the additional demand for products and services. Those primarily living paycheck to paycheck see their so-called disposable incomes getting taxed away, leaving their standard of living unchanged. So why is socialism in any form does not elevate the middle class but shrinks it? Such is why. While MMT policy proponents suggest that giving free money will boost economic equality, the opposite is the case, as shown by the net worth of the top 10% versus the bottom 50% of the population. Yes, the top 1%, total net worth 32.1%. Bottom 50%, 2.5%. Yes. While MMTers believe that debt doesn't matter and use Japan as an example, the reality is quite different. The premise is that Japan has successfully run massive deficits and the economy has not collapsed yet. Therefore, it is a model that the U.S. can follow. However, while it is true that Japan's economy hasn't collapsed under the weight of its debt, it also hasn't grown. Despite that massive surge in central bank interventions, it, like the U.S., has had little effect on economic prosperity. While stock markets have performed well, economic growth is roughly equal to this century's beginning. Japan remains plagued by rolling recessions, low inflation, and low interest rates. Such is hardly a model I think most Americans want to follow. However, it is what we have been doing for the last 40 years. The massive increase in debt and deficit spending did not result in a surge of economic prosperity. However, the 1% of the 1% or the top 10% of the 1%, they have made out like bandits. And that's really what it's all about, isn't it? The rich getting richer. I mean, that's the way it's supposed to be. I mean, that's what they tell us. And so, it's not as if they have a pecuniary interest in this. I'm going to go a little longer today at the end of the week. This is an essay at the American Sun by Lamprey Milt, Downhill from Apex, which was published 4 days ago. And I want to talk about, the climate extinction reality or whatever they call it. They keep changing the name of what it is we're supposed to be terrified of. Lamprey Milt writes, I've been toying with the idea that the climate change hysteria is a way of cloaking what's really at hand, that we are running out of cheap energy and natural resources and polluting the planet at an accelerated pace. It's much easier to promote climate change since it's more of this vague lurking monster that has no end, so it's less urgent to those conducting actual business and commerce. The ambiguity of it all makes most rational minds scoff at man-made climate change. It doesn't take much brain power to realize that the sun truly dictates climate change. Tell the masses that we're going to be out of fuel by XXX. I wouldn't want to imagine the chaos which would ensue. It's hard for us to sort through statistics and references since global warming and climate change fanatics block the facts and multinationals will skew data in their favor. Personally, I just can't see how it's plausible humans, an animal, a product of Earth, has the ability to change a planet's climate. We certainly pollute, but the Earth does heal. Those that believe in climate change overestimate and overemphasize man's ability to innovate. That man is God and can play God. If Earth wants to get rid of us, it will. The 2004 Boxing Day tsunami killed upwards of 300,000 in less than 7 hours. This affected Earth's rotation, decreased the length of the day, changed the planet's shape, and shifted the North Pole. This was just a morsel of what the planet can do. The war in Ukraine and now the farmer protests in Holland have pushed a few ideas to the front of my mind, considering the fact how much energy flows out of Russia and Ukraine, being a quintessential component of the world's grain supply, simply accounting for 10% of it. How many people can be fed on this earth? There is, of course, no simple answer to this question, but some factoids are worth noting. The average person gets about 48% of their calories from grain. In 2013, world commercial grain stocks were roughly 330 million tons, which can cover 50 days of global consumption. Wheat, corn, and rice account for 90% of all grains. Wheat yields have plateaued since 1996. If oil goes to $200 a barrel, that will push grain prices 50% higher than they are now. With inflation, personal expenditures rising, and no end in sight, the question is which countries will be most affected? Well, it's the Middle East, North Africa region, with all countries having a deep belief in the religion of peace. This region has the industrial output of Finland, which says a lot about the aggressive state of affairs of a region with a population of 500 million. The only two things that keep this region afloat are the Western nations' subsidies and those nations' dependence on oil. Iraq imports a little more than 60% of its grain, with a population growing at 800,000 per year, requiring 300,000 metric tons per year to feed them. Afghanistan, when the U.S. first invaded the country, had a population of 24 million. Today is closing in on 41 million. Not bad for a country that has seen a conflict inside its territory over the past 2 decades, with a birth-to-death ratio of 467 to 1. It makes me wonder what their population would be if the U.S. didn't provide so much aid in food subsidies. But even after the Soviet invasion, its population grew at 2% annually. Under ideal conditions, the carrying capacity is 13 million. Now, with the Taliban back in charge, with a mighty arsenal left behind by the United States, the only way to sedate an overpopulated country is to continue feeding them. Given that Taliban is supposed to be the deadly enemy of the United States of America, and perhaps the deadly enemy in that region of the world, why is it some sort of moral necessity for the United States to continue to send sufficient food to Afghanistan such that its population continues to skyrocket? Again, Afghanistan is desert. It's desert. This is quite a long essay, but I do recommend it to you. It is by Lamprey Melt, who is a friend of this live stream, as you may know, and you can find it at theamericansun.com. Insects. Don't you just love them? I mean, don't you just love munching on them? This is from the BBC by someone called Pascal Quesiga. For most people in Europe and the US, the idea of eating crickets and grasshoppers can seem revolting, but they are a popular snack. In parts of Africa and Asia, there's all sorts of habits in Africa and Asia that I do not want adopted here. They like to kill dogs for food in Asia. You know, one of the things they like to do? They like to boil them alive in the belief that the terror the dogs feel makes them tastier. Maybe we should import that Asian custom as well. Not only are they packed with nutrients, but they are less harmful to the climate too. The air in my family home in Uganda was filled with a distinct aroma not dissimilar to the smell of beef being grilled. It was in December 2000, and my sister Maggie was frying grasshoppers. The more she stirred the green, crispy, locust-like insects, the stronger and richer the aroma became. As they sizzled and steam rose from the pan, my taste buds tingled. I couldn't wait to eat this delicious snack. This wasn't my first experience of eating grasshoppers. I used to eat them regularly during my childhood. In Uganda, grasshoppers are a nutritious delicacy and a much sought-after snack. And he goes on, oh, the smell of the grasshoppers always reminds me of Christmas. We are being gaslighted here. Mass formation psychosis. And this is from the conservative treehouse. Oh, yes. Climate alarmist explains policy targeting farmers to end all beef, pork, and chicken from human diet. This is an essay, an interview at RTE, which is the Irish public broadcaster. And he doesn't, I figured out who it was. They really should tell us who it is. It's a longtime Guardian guru, George Monbiot, who has become a deep green. And by deep green, what I mean is he wants billions of people to die, to starve to death. There's no tippy-toeing around this. Philippa Nuttall at the New Statesman on May the 13th. George Monbiot, agriculture is arguably the most destructive industry on earth. The campaigner and author of Why We Must Break the Stranglehold of Traditional Farmers to Prevent Environmental Catastrophe. In the interview, he insists that agriculture must be ended. All agriculture must be ended because it's killing the planet. So what happens if we end agriculture? How many people will be left on Earth? A billion? 500 million? 100 million? 50 million? We're going to go back to hunter-gatherers? That's what's going to happen? This is what deep greens, being a deep green means. And if you ever find yourself arguing with one of these people, just point out to them that the end result of their policies is the death of billions of people and a regression of human civilization to the Middle Ages, Dark Ages, perhaps. I don't think that their precious internet would work anymore, so they wouldn't be able to get, bachelorette updates. Maybe explain it to them that way. Maybe, that would make a difference. Here's Daisy Jones from Vice. Adults who still drink milk, are you okay? Unless you're a hungry baby, drinking milk on its own is unsettling behavior. I'm not the only person who finds the sight of grown-ass adults drinking whole milk unsettling. Type adult and milk into Twitter and you'll see tweets like, I do not trust adults who drink milk. Adults who drink milk straight from the glass disturb me, because it is disturbing. It's like seeing an adult man wearing a t-shirt and no pants like Winnie the Pooh, or when people kiss their dogs on the mouth for ages, or when someone over the age of 16 uses the word mommy in a non-kink setting. I do not consume milk. I don't drink it. I don't put it in my tea. I know that other people like milk, and milk is well integrated into our culture. But milk is an agricultural product, and agriculture is evil. This is where the Greens are. They have led themselves to the position where agriculture itself is evil. How many thousands of years have we had agriculture? But they were wrong. All the early farmers and herders were wrong, because we should have been, gnawing on roots and berries instead. Well, when the big ESG movers make a decision, that's where we're going. This is from Julian Conradson at the Gateway Pundit. In the face of unprecedented global energy shortages, thanks to the radical green agenda's push to move away from fossil fuels, the puppet masters behind dystopian environmental, social, and governance (ESG) scores are quietly shifting a portion of their investments into the oil and gas industry. In other words, the green shift has entered phase 2 as the climate warriors begin to capitalize on the crippled markets. It's time to cash out. According to Zero Hedge, ESG investors, particularly in Europe, are now embracing fossil fuel investments as the market continues to outperform expectations. Additionally, investments are expected to increase over the coming months, with several ESG powerhouses actively scouting oil and gas companies in order to find the best potential return. Prior to this year, there had been a grand total of 0 ESG funds invested in fossil fuels. Now these green scam artists are even investing in Shell oil. How about that? Okay. And We have a deep green in Canada, a max faucet. And of course, what we need to do in Canada with our oil and gas is to leave it in the ground. There is a tremendous political opportunity that I have seen no one in the West pick up. It's the proverbial money left on the table for a politician to say, I'm not having anything to do with this climate change nonsense. First of all, the climate is always changing, always has changed. There's no evidence that we have much to do with it. No evidence that we can stop it. We can destroy our economies. We can kill billions of people, but I'm not in favor of that. The whole hysteria over this is based on faked data and bogus models, and it ends with me. Any politician who made this his policy would instantly become famous, instantly have, to begin with, at least 20 to 30% political support. But no, they're all too cowardly. They all take the position. I haven't heard Pierre Poilievre say anything about this. Jason Kenney went along with it for the most part. Oh, yes, we're definitely in favor of, destroying our economy and, radically reducing our standard of living. But we're going to do it a little slower than the bad guys. So vote for us, okay? We're fully committed to the war against mankind's eternal enemy, carbon. But we're just not as obsessed with it, perhaps, as the bad guys, the ones you shouldn't vote for. And I'm going to leave you with some good news. This is from slaynews.com. A large group of independent American truckers has risen up in protest against California's gig worker law and shut down the port of Oakland. Truck drivers blocked terminal gates with their vehicles, causing officials to cease operations at the major port. California truckers have been forming en masse at the Bay Area docks every day this week to protest AB 5. The 2019 law requires companies like Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash to reclassify independent contractors as employees. However, truck drivers who own and operate their rigs have pushed back against the legislation. These are independent small businesses that choose to operate their own trucks, and now that right is taken away from them. Bill Abudi, owner of AB Trucking, told CNBC, they do pay taxes, they do have insurance. It's their choice to do that. Last month, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear the California Trucking Association's appeal that was in place for roughly 2 years to protect an estimated 70,000 independent truckers from the law's impact. Abudi told KTVU that his company has independent owner-operators to backfill employee drivers. We can't handle the volume with our company trucks, he said, so you rely on people that are working for multiple people or companies that are considered they are owner-operators. Yes, good news. As I tweeted last week, a tweet that has something like 112,000 impressions, the kulaks have nothing to lose but their chains. Let's take a final look at the chat. Jogan666, our valiant moderator, says, I got a vintage Hamilton khaki rare blue anchor dial just today in my Japan parcel. You're curious, Alika says, yogurt and kefir is delightful. My Trail of Disgrace likes kefir as well. Oscar Toe says, it's interesting that in the Michael Jackson Man in the Mirror that he goes for MLK imagery, then it's very fair with representations of whites too. John Willis says, John Deere Lucifer, a great band name. Chokin666 says, you will hear mothers calling their sons Pappy. Okay. It's not easy being deep green, says Chokin666. That's a reference to a song by Joe Raposo called It's Not Easy Being Green, which I think existed before it was adopted by Kermit the Frog. Mango worms, botflies, these are the wonders of Africa, says Chokin666. Grasshoppers are the real aroma of Christmas, says Oscar Toe. Spot is a delish Vietnamese food, says Don Willis. I don't know. I much prefer, not that I eat it very often these days, I much prefer Vietnamese food to Chinese food, which I simply cannot abide. Just mush, rubbery vegetables. I attribute this to the French influence in Vietnam. Could be wrong. Oscar Toe says the GOP complains about budgets after printing up to $60 billion for Zelensky. Will a real fiscal conservative stand up? Asked Don Willis. Tighten your belts, hold the line, reduce budget, be patriotic, be responsible, says Don Willis. I get 2 calls a day from Con Ed telling me it's hot out, says Choke Again 666. Okay, one thing that DeSantis is doing is cutting checks for Florida residents. About time the GOP gave to their own citizens, says Oscar Toe. Max Vitriol says, given how corrupt Chinese real estate is, this guy is corrupt. He just picked the wrong CCP faction. It's estimated that 30 to 40% of the British Columbia economy is based on real estate. And British Columbia real estate is based on gangster money, triad money from China, which is laundered in casinos. And many of these casinos in British Columbia, particularly in Richmond, which is pretty much a Chinese city, all the signs are in Chinese. It's pretty much for Chinese only. And the money is brought and laundered to casinos. The Richmond government knows it. The British Columbia government knows it. The police know it. The federal government knows it. But this is one of the big questions of our time in Canada. To what extent Canada has been suborned by communist China? 401ks can be good, but mostly just helps investment companies who do not have our interests in mind, says Oscar Toe. Tarot Destroyer says Malaysian business magnate Robert Kwok, part of the market-dominant minority, I see, born 1923, is worth $12.6 billion, making him the wealthiest person in Malaysia and 104th wealthiest in the world. And does Kevin like pizza? Yeah, I like pizza. I like it simple, though. I really don't like pizza where you're afraid to hold up the piece because it just slides down like that. I mean, pizza originated as peasant food, simple peasant food, right? You got unleavened bread and you put some tomato sauce and cheese on it. I think to the extent that it radically varies from that, then it's a mistake. Pizza by the slice food truck would make a lot of money, says Oscar Toe. Okay. Hello to Ruslan Akhmatov. And McDonald's does have good fries, says Oscar Toe. Well, Julia Child, the late chef Julia Child, I think she had the final word on this. When they're fresh, they're good. And by fresh, I would say certainly within 5 minutes of coming out of the fryer, maybe closer to 3. Longer than that, they taste like cardboard. They seriously taste like cardboard. I'm trying to remember George Gilder. He wrote this book called Wealth and Poverty, which was enormous bestseller. This was, back in the Reagan days, right? And he never matched that or never came close in any of his subsequent books. But his second book, which I gather was supposed to be a big hit, but wasn't, free enterprise, all that sort of thing. Actually, his book Sexual Suicide from 1973 is really good. And his book Visible Man, A True Story of Post-Racist America, that is very good indeed. The Spirit of Enterprise, 1986. And he goes on at great length about a man, I believe from Idaho, I think his name was Simplot, something like that, who discovered how potatoes could be frozen, thus facilitating, what we get at McDonald's now and, Wendy's and all these other places. And frozen potatoes. Yeah, this is where efficiency gets you. French fries are delicious and they're easy to make. But no, we need to get maximum efficiency. So we need to freeze potatoes. Just like in Tim Hortons, which, that's Canadian culture right there. Timmy's hockey, double. You've summed up Canada. That's all there is. They use frozen dough because they can squeeze another penny or two out of every dollar. And let's see if there's anything new at the chat. As I say, I've gone a little long today. I just didn't want to have anything left over. Yes, margarita pizza. Yes, I quite like that. I love me some homemade French fried potatoes, says Anne. So do I. Oscar Toe says the food truck at a carnival I went to last week had hot dogs for $10. I hope those were gourmet wieners. Okay. That's it. Thanks for your kind words, Oscar Toe, and thank you all for tuning in. As you know, I greatly appreciate it. I shall be back on the air Monday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you'd like to make a donation to the live stream, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations may be made to the live stream directly via interact@kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this benediction in these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse. I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection to ease the burden. Good night.